Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith as well. Today marks our 8th episode. So we've been doing this podcast for 2 months now.
Wow.
8 weeks.
Time flies.
Time really does fly. And while we're on that, just thank you so much to all of our viewers, all of our listeners for being a part of this journey with us. We have been figuring this platform out as we go, iterating as we go, and it's been so good to have all of you along with us on the ride. And thank you for all of your feedback, some of which we have implemented today. In fact, somebody gave me some, actually we had 2 people who gave us some pretty salient feedback about our camera placement. So today is a bit of a test run, new camera angles. The short of it is that they have been saying that, it's better to see more of our faces. I think in our previous episodes, maybe our camera angles have been maybe a little too much to the side. So now we're trying something a bit different, a bit more frontal. So do let us know what you think, if this is an improvement. But yes, 8 weeks of this podcast, that you have just come back from a short trip to Perth to see your brother, to see Uncle Rubin.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that. How was it?
It was really wonderful. I haven't been to Perth in 15 years. And so it's been a long time. My brother lives in Perth with his family. He went there to do his O-level, did his A-level, his bachelor degree and master's degree, decided to stay put there. But it was a wonderful time. We went to see James Taylor, the legendary James Taylor concert.
I'm very jealous.
Really, very nice. I mean, the interesting thing was it hasn't rained in Perth for the last 6 months. Of all the nights, that was the night it rained. And he sang Fire and Rain. It was really very nice. We were all seated out there. It was fantastic. We all braved the rain. Everybody was there. So we had our first night. We were at that concert. Very next day, I think we went out. We did some fishing as well. My brother and I love fishing. We got a lot of skippies. We have fresh fish for lunch and dinner. And then we went to a winery as well. Beautiful, great wine. We had lunch in the winery area. We did a little bit of shopping. Your first cousin, Sophia, she has a boutique store there called Perlu, and we went there. And fantastic. So she was running her own store. Very nice. And lots of barbecue. And we had all sorts of meat that we put on the table. We had friends coming out there. Really fantastic.
And you might think this is us trying to be true to Australian stereotype, but in fact, actually, barbecue is very much a Clubbit tradition.
Yeah. We had some... We smoked some lamb, we smoked some pork, and we smoked some beef as well. Really, really fantastic. So, and your first cousin, he has a band. His name is Trevor Jala, and he has a band called that. It was a trio, blues trio. It was fantastic. Each of the 3 players, they interchanged to play drum, they interchanged to sing, and to play the lead guitar. So every other song, they turn around and they swap guitars, and it was fantastic. It was at the Perth Blues Club. Fantastic.
And you were saying that people were dancing right from the first song. Something that you would never see here in Malaysia.
You don't see. From the very first, this is blues. It's not disco music or whatever, not house music. They were already dancing on the floor. It was fantastic. We had great fun. So everything we wanted to do, we crammed them all together. And we went to a wildlife park as well. And we stood at Koala Bear. There were so many things there. And so fantastic time. So I think in 1 week, we saw a lot of things in that time.
Very jealous about James Taylor. Was this your first time seeing James Taylor?
First time. I have not seen
Actually,
James
I can't
Taylor
believe
before.
you, for such a big fan, you have never been able to catch him. And we've lived in so many different places that he would have, toured and gigged at.
He's one of the person on my list. I really want to see in my lifetime. There are people on my list that I have not seen. They have already died. Jerry Rafferty is an example. And David Gilmour from Pink Floyd I have not seen yet. But the Eagles,
also
and
very surprising.
Clapton and B.B. King, I've seen all of those guys. When we were in the UK, lived in the UK for 4 years. In Holland, seen a lot of concerts as well. But I have not seen many. But the blues people, I've seen many of them. Clapton, we've seen a few times. Bob Dylan as well. So Jackson Brown and fantastic. That was fantastic. James Taylor is 76 years old. And his vocals is still as good as it was. his voice has become a little bit more raspy than it was before. You know, James Taylor has one blues song, only one, Steamroller Blues. And I think it's better sung now than he ever did when he was younger because his voice is more raspy. And I think he's learned a lot to play his lead guitar as well. So his lead guitar, although he's got the guitarist that plays the lead, but parts of the lead was done by him. It was really very good sharing lead work at that. And we were listening, and everybody on the crowd was just on their feet. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting we talk about James Taylor, in some ways actually improving with age.
Vintage, Leon.
Vintage, which actually brings me to there's been a common thread in some of the questions that people have asked us. I presume these are coming from maybe younger members of our audience, but it's the question about experience. So you and I both, we thoroughly believe in learning by doing. And I think many people would as well. Albert Einstein says the only source of knowledge is experience. But how then do we reconcile that with, let's say, a fresh graduate who has come out of uni and they're looking to join the workforce? And then the classic example or the classic narrative of a fresh graduate who maybe only has internship experience, who applies for a job and are denied the job on account that they don't have the necessary work experience. How does one start accumulating that experience as a fresh graduate?
As a fresh graduate, I think I always believe that people that learn the most are people that are prepared to really learn by pushing themselves to the limits. And if you are too scared to push yourself to the limits, you can learn by experience, but not deep enough to gain a quantum leap. So those that really, really pick up a lot of experience are graduates that immerse themselves into a job and really push themselves to the limits. That's why I call the game The Impossible was episode 1. I encourage young people, if you do not want to grow, then don't begin the game of the impossible. But if you do really want to grow and you're passionate about getting the best out of yourself, then pursue that road called the game of the impossible. Because if you push yourself to the limits, you will have tremendous experience. And in that experience, the growth is quantum leap.
But how does one, let's take it very practical now. If I was a fresh grad, I have my story of how I did this, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. So if I'm a fresh grad, I want to apply for a job, okay? But this company is now denying me, or maybe multiple companies have actually denied me, not even wanted to have an interview with me because I don't meet the experience requirement, even for an entry-level job. How then do I ensure that I get the job in the first place in order to then get the experience?
To begin with, your letter must be a letter that strikes them. If your letter is a very boring letter, remember, for every applicant, there's probably 1,000 other letters there. And if your letter is just like all the other thousands, it's not going to catch the attention of the reader. So when I first wrote for my job, and I really wanted the job more because I wanted the ticket, as I said in one of the podcasts, my starting line was, I am the man you're looking for. And when you say that as a starting line in the letter, the subsequent lines must back it up. And you must back it up so that the person who is going to call you for the interview said, I'd like to see this young man. And it's very important. So if you put a statement like, I'm the man you're looking for, you have to back it up in the subsequent line. Don't make a letter very long. If your letter runs into 2 pages, you haven't got it because the attention span is very short. There's so many letters out there. So I think your letter must be so compelling. So the guy the recruiter called Johnny Leong, when he offered me the job, eventually I got the job there. I asked him, why is it that you guys called me for the interview? You know what he said? Because your letter is cocky. I was really curious to see all this cocky young boy, and that's why I gave you the interview. In fact, the interview was, the applicants must have 2 years experience. I have none. And so because I put in all the reasons why I needed to do it, and inside there, they were curious about me, that's why they gave. So I think the starting point is, how do you open the door to get an invitation? Because if you are not invited for the interview, you're not even in the game. So you have to find a way how to really get them to think that your letter is unique, and therefore you are worth wanting for them to see. Curiosity is a virtue.
So on that, actually, that's quite an interesting paradox there, because the premise is that the doing or the experience is what is the requirement on paper. But interestingly enough, the thing that dictates whether or not you even get the opportunity or get their attention is interestingly a being thing.
Yeah,
So your being of, presenting yourself in a particular way that stands out. Interestingly enough, it's the being that then enables them to have a conversation about your potential doing.
Yeah, I mean, you need both. And I think that people who think that the only thing that is needed in life is just the doing, that's also not correct. You need both of them. For example, I do believe that there's a place for university learning. Classroom learning is needed because it gives you frameworks. It gives you theory. It gives you practical do's and don'ts, what generally people think from a theoretical perspective. But theory doesn't get results. It's the experience, is the doing that get results. So with that, then you come out and it's like an array of tools that you have on your hands. You now figure out you're going to do something, but the circumstances then suggest that I'm better using this tool rather than that tool. But that you will don't know that theoretically. You'll only know this practically when you're in the field, figuring out what to do, which tool to use, which framework to use. You will only know when you get results. When you get results, then you realize that next time when I have similar sets of circumstances, the best and the most appropriate method of doing it is this, with these kinds of skills and toolkits. That's how you then move. But I think in the end, having said that, if you have gone out and got the university learning, let's say you've been to school, you went to university and you got your degree, and then you come back there, the most important part is experiential learning. Don't think about now, I need another course. I need to attend another course to improve my sales pitch. How do I get sales? No. You don't go and say to your employer, send me for another 3 weeks of training to get some more technique on how to sell. But you really need to go there and be on the bike, really selling a television, whatever you're selling, and you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then you change it. When you start learning that, in no time, Leon, you'll pick up a lot of skills you probably never get in the classroom.
It's interesting you talk about university. That's a hotly debated topic right now.
Yeah.
A lot of people are saying that there's a whole school of thought, one whole camp that argues that university is becoming a bit of an archaic institution. Their argument is that you can learn so much through either things like YouTube or paid online courses that you don't really need to go for, you don't really need to spend 3 years at university to learn those skills. And to your point on experiential learning, I think they would then argue, isn't it better for, let's say if someone wants to be an entrepreneur, is it not better to just not bother going to university, start that business of yours and figure it out as you go, versus doing a business management degree and then potentially an MBA later on, where it would be arguably a bit more theoretical. What is your view on this as the pro-chancellor of Sunway University here in Malaysia?
Yeah, I do believe there's room for both. That you have to do classroom learning at university, at the same time applied learning. That means learning by doing. You need both. The question that we have to ask today is that, do you need the same length of time that we had before to have a bachelor degree, the same length of time? Today, I completely of the view that we don't need the same length of time, because the learning is much faster than it was before. There are various modes of learning. So I think universities have to change their attitude towards that. And why I say that is this. There are two areas that I believe are very important in learning. One is the curriculum itself. The curriculum, I believe, can be changed. And I think I'm much more a believer in multidisciplinary curriculum, because there's a lot of aspects of learning that are intertwined. To have them pure different subjects, you can't do that, it takes too long. But I think if you do a multidisciplinary curriculum much more, you can condense the length of time for learning. That's one. The other one is pedagogy, structured pedagogy, methods of teaching. There are many, many new methods of teaching because of AI, the advancement of YouTube. And so I think pedagogy is a very important. I would say structured pedagogy, if you make a real attempt at doing that, all you need to do is find out who is the best lecturer in the university that teach the best on geography. And then if you sit with that lecturer, you'll find that person has a different and unique way of teaching it, the subject, that creates interest amongst the students. So if you then capture the learning method of that person and put it in methodologies that other teachers, other lecturers can follow, you will have quantum leap growth in doing that. So if you have the best method of teaching and structured pedagogy and a renewed curriculum that will then speed up the learning amongst the kids, I don't think you need to spend all the time that you can half the time that they spend in university and still get the cutting edge real learning for the students.
The real advocates for university, I think I probably lean there as well, because I agree that university, there's only so much you can learn in the classroom. For me personally, I studied film.
Yeah.
And honestly, I would say that I've learned far more about filmmaking, about content creation, actually doing it. So
Absolutely.
doing this podcast, I have learned actually a lot more about very, very practical
Absolutely.
and how to be very strategic about content creation versus actually what I learned in university. However, what the real advocates for university would argue, and that was very much my experience as well, is that if I were to take university out of the equation, and if I were to rewind the clock and imagine if I had not gone to university and studied what I studied, I'd be missing out on a whole other component, which is actually a life experience. We're talking about experiential learning, but sure, you can learn more about that particular skill, perhaps doing the thing, but there's actually other skills that you develop by virtue of experiencing that campus life, as it were. So for me, one of the big things was learning how to live with other people.
Growing up.
Yeah. Cooking for myself, getting food poisoning. The first time I tried to cook, I remember the first meal that I cooked for myself after you and Mum dropped me off at uni. I decided I was gonna make a curry. So I said, okay, I have those ready-made curry jars of curry sauce. Like, how difficult can this be? Like, half the work has already been done for me. So I said, okay, and we did a big grocery run. You and Mum, did a massive grocery run with me just before you dropped me off. So I said, and I have the chicken, I've got the onions. Okay lah, I just need to chop the onions, put the chicken in, chuck the curry sauce, should be good. And so that's what I did. And out came the most tender, most very, very delicious curry. And I was just thinking, wow, my first attempt at a curry, the chicken is remarkably tender, not dry whatsoever. And then the next morning, I realized why it was tender, because I was on the toilet for many hours because I had basically undercooked the chicken, and that's why it was so tender.
Years ago, Leon, this guy called Ivan Illich, many, many years ago, he wrote a book called De-Schooling Society. He's a radical guy in his time. Already then, many, many years, I could have been 50 years ago when he wrote the book, De-Schooling Society. He really believed society need to stop going to school. And for the reasons where he believed that a lot of learning is picked up outside school. And so he propagated this idea that societies must really de-school. And because he was really passionate about it, he's not entirely correct, in my view, but he's not entirely wrong. Somewhere in the middle is the truth, particularly in today's age. There's so much learning on YouTube. You can learn so much things. You want to fix a guitar, you want to figure out how to improve, repair your phone, how to cook a curry, and it's all there. Really.
I could have done with a YouTube video or two in my time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with structured pedagogy, really improve attempt to do that, and a revised curriculum, I think you make a radical quantum leap change in the way in which societies really harness the best of education.
There's also something to be said about the community element. I think we can learn about a skill on our own, but if that is done devoid of community, Number one, you are not benefiting from the other aspects of community, i.e., for I think many of us, a lot of the benefit of me going to uni, I mean, like we quipped about the curry thing, but actually it's really the people that I've met. And these are people who have gone on to be very influential in just basically the creative scene at large. So that's one. I think there's a network element to it. But then there's also the fact that it's within community that you kind of enliven your learning. We've talked about this before, but it's about how you don't fully learn about something until you have taught it. And when it's done within community and you're able to discuss and sometimes even debate ideas in your seminars, that actually further strengthens any convictions that you have about a particular topic, but then also allows room for correction. Maybe course correction. If you have an idea challenge, you debate it with another a fellow classmate, and you find yourself actually reflecting and thinking, actually, this person has a point, and then shifting. That also becomes another learning. You're learning how to debate in a healthy manner, and how to not hold on too tightly to certain ideas as well, and to lose graciously.
I think your point about community learning from other people. You may remember in theory there's a thing called Johari window. So if you and I do a 2x2 matrix, what I know and what I don't know, what you know and what you don't know. So you just think about it as that 2x2 matrix. When we have a discussion, I can tell you what I know. Some of what I know fall into what you don't know, and vice versa. What you know is fall into the area what I don't know. And that interaction between us as a community in that conversation, it enlarges the area for the area that I know, because I now pick up the things that you told me that was originally in the list of I don't know, and vice versa. Can you imagine you have two other person in the room, and then you multiply that, how quickly you can learn. Now, in a conversation, in a classroom, the key here is that how do you get the moderator or the lecturer to get the most out of the conversation so that it straddle more into the areas of you don't know, based on the area for people who know it. And as you rightly pointed out, if you think you know it all and you close the door, that's the end of you in terms of growth. But if you're open to knowing that there are areas, your blind spot in the areas you call you don't know based on the Johari window, you are then prepared to embrace other thoughts and other views. That's how you can get step change in learning.
Speaking about knowing many things, there's also sometimes a cost to that, which is classic university scenario. I went through it, but I think my brother Max went through it big time, which was being seen as the more capable one when it comes to group work. I think this is something that I hated in uni, but it was also one of the most beneficial things for me. When you work in a group, and if you are seen as or deemed as one of the more capable ones, there is often the tendency for members of the group to delegate all of the work to you. And in my brother's case, he essentially carried the entire project himself without any help from the rest. So university also helps you actually deal with things like that, because those are situations that you're going to meet in the workplace. There are going to be people who will want to take credit for your work. So knowing how to skillfully navigate those sorts of dynamics, which you actually can't run away from. You can't blame someone for thinking, oh, this person is good at it, why don't we just let this person do it? But you, as maybe as the victim, there are certain skills in learning how to manage those things. You know, I'd love for you to share a little bit, because we always talk about learning by doing, and this is very much present in the way that you run PEMANDU Associates, in the way that I manage my team as well. For you, what does that look like, and how do you institutionalize this sense of learning by doing in PEMANDU Associates, or perhaps in the other organizations that you have been a part of?
Yeah, when we finish the session where we're picking up, free flow discussion, we will get into a learning by doing. In that learning by doing, we'll cover 8 episodes, step by step, how to go and apply that. So I do believe that the practical things that you can now do. We covered in the 6 episodes up to now, the principles of transformational leadership. Those are principles, but they're not actual actions that you need to take. But in the 8 episodes that we will cover up to this, we will then take step by step what are the steps you need to take practically to get them to be implemented. So I think we'll cover a lot of that then.
The other part I wanted to touch on is it's kind of linked is on execution. So as I was looking at some of the comments on, especially on TikTok is an interesting place. I feel that that's currently where we have the widest reach. So, but with the widest reach also comes a larger net for perhaps negative feedback and comments. And this has been an ongoing narrative, especially when it comes to your achievements at MAS, Malaysia Airlines, where you used to be the CEO. A lot of people, for context, first of all, in your short time there, you were able to completely turn around the company from being completely unprofitable to the point of, I think you only had
record profits.
But the pretext to that was at the point when you joined, what was your runway again? How many months did you have actually
we had
to
2.5 months of cash.
2.5 months of cash. So being in a really dire situation to being able to completely turn around the company to record profits. A lot of people back then and until now might say that, well, that's easy to do because nothing special about what Idris Jala did. All you did was sell off your assets. So anybody can do that. What are your thoughts on that? And specifically maybe touch on your thoughts on that, but in line with the importance then of execution and how to execute something correctly.
I mean, the point was this. We sold the assets not because I was trying to use that to make money. We sold the asset in order to pay for redundancies. We had 22,000 staff. We had far too many staff in the company then. We knew that we could not continue our business by being overstaffed. But I didn't want anyone to be forcibly redundant. The only way we could do it to raise money was to sell our building. We sold our building for 130 million ringgit. And so we needed to reduce our staff by 3,000 people and needed to do that in the first 2 to 3 months that I was there. And so we needed that to be able to be clear, when we sold our building for 130 million ringgit, that was in our first year. To be clear, we did not make money in my first year, and that we book it in our profit and loss statement. You can't book an asset sale 2 times in a year. So we sold the building in our first year, that's 2006. In the year before, our loss was 1.3 billion ringgit. So in the first year when I was there, we took the 130 million ringgit to make sure that we then pay people to leave. And we paid 3,052 people left. Within the first 2 months when I was there, we paid them good redundancy packages, so they left. And so when we did that, we started to cut costs as well in other areas. And so we then downsized our size of the network within the period. So in my first year, we broke even. We didn't make money. So my critics who say that Idris made money from selling assets, we did not make money in the year we sold assets, to be clear. It was the year 2007, we made money. We made money in 2008. We made money in 2007. So because we're a publicly listed company, every quarter, we had to go and publish our quarterly results. So every quarter during my 3 years and 8 months there, post the first year, every quarter we were turning around a profit. And none of that was related to asset sale. Because asset sale was done in year 1 when we did not make money. So the critics of me that says Idris made money from sale assets, that's wrong. Plainly wrong. We made money in years we did not sell assets.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. But even if you wanted to take a simplistic view of how you were able to turn around the company, I would argue then if there was one thing that stands out, it was actually your segmented P&L of every flight. Maybe talk to us a bit more about that approach.
What we did was I made sure that I get all the data from all our flights. We have 110,000 flights in a year for the whole year. And I insisted that we have to have profit and loss statement for every individual flight. So it meant we were creating 110,000 profit and loss statement for the whole year. And my CFO nearly fell off his chair because I was insisting. And when we did that, it became very clear to me that the answers were in the disease. So if a particular flight was losing money, it was very clear when you look very closely at it, that's where you find the answers. An example being, we were losing something like 20 million ringgit flying to London from Kuala Lumpur. And we were having a monopoly. I couldn't understand how is it that we're having a monopoly. There was no other flight that you could take from Kuala Lumpur, direct flight to London. We were the only guys. We were only, if you want to, you have to fly via another route, go to Dubai, from Dubai to London. That, of course, taking a lot of time. And for the life of me, I didn't understand. But when you broke down the P&L, you know what we found, Leon? For the whole year, the same 2 routes every day, the same 2 flights was making money. For the whole year, the same 2 flights was losing money because the slot time for the flight to land in London Heathrow was the wrong time. The only way we could get people to come on that flight was to drop our fare. And the fare was so low that the revenue coming out from the fare was not enough to cover the cost of flying that plane. So what's the solution? Get rid of those 2 flights. And the very next day, we were printing money flying to London. And we found other routes when we did the profit and loss statement. We were making so much money flying from Kuala Lumpur to Hong Kong and to Tokyo, for example. We were making so much money. We didn't have enough planes. So when we cut routes in the areas where we were losing money, we deployed the plane in those areas. And when we did the segmented P&L on the kangaroo routes, if I'm not mistaken now, all the flights are coming from Europe that lands to London, to Kuala Lumpur, connecting passengers wanting to go to Adelaide and other places like that. The connecting flights is already left. So what's the solution? Reschedule the flights. It was just that. So what we did was we broke down our profit and loss statement, and all companies have a P&L, one P&L at the corporate level. We broke them down to 110,000 individual flights. We gathered laboratories. We had 6 laboratories. The kangaroo routes, North Asian labs, we have the European labs, Southeast Asian lab, the domestic labs, and we got flight, the crew in there, marketing and sales people, IT and HR people. We told them, you sit here for 6 weeks. These are the individual flights. These are the P&L. You tell me what is the answer in 6 weeks. It's incredible, Leon. The level of quality that came out from the troops was totally incredible. I was just blown by it because when you get the best out from people, they look at the P&L, they focus on the individual P&L. The answers they just jump out from the woodworks. And the best part is, it's not my idea, Leon. The solutions came from them. And because the solutions came from them, they had the buy-in. They had the commitment to deliver it. It was absolutely incredible. And we did that in 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, we had finished all the reconfigurations. We knew which flights to cut, which flights to add, where we have to cut costs, where to change our schedule, where to redeploy the different planes. The domestic flights, they needed different planes. And in that time, the idea of creating, Firefly came about. We concluded that there were so many of the flights that domestic, if you put jets flying there, you don't have enough passengers to fly. And so Kota Baru, for example, we didn't have enough to fill it. So we thought if we had a smaller plane and we put it there and we have much greater frequency, we'll have the answers. In 4 months, we gave birth to a completely new airline called Firefly.
And again, this goes back to not just learning by doing, but actually innovation by doing.
Absolutely.
Because you had introduced an approach that I think there's a lot to unpack here because, when you said your CFO almost fell off his chair, I can imagine that because it's a huge inconvenience to now say we are going to segmentize our P&L. We're going to look at every single flight. What a headache that it's going to be for everybody.
To be clear, Leon, I was on the IATA board. I finished during my time as CEO of Malaysia Airlines. I was voted onto IATA. We had about 30 people on the board of IATA, or the CEOs, and I was voted in. In the time when I was there, I can assure you there was no other airline in the world that produced segmented P&L on an individual flight basis. They did segmented P&L by route. That means London to Kuala Lumpur is a route. That means there's one P&L for the whole year.
Yep.
For all the flights that fly. But mine was segmented on a daily basis.
Individual
flights. And so I think I have not found any airline to this day that do that, because it was hard to do. And so not only did we just do the P&L for the whole year last year, but I wanted P&L every single day going forward. So in a particular day, so like if I'm the CEO today, at 5 o'clock I can check on my phone. In those days it was BlackBerry. There was no other phone, BlackBerry. Every single one of us managers, including me, we could see which flight we made money on that day, which flight we don't make money, because we had something like 200 flights in a day. So I could tell. And when we knew that, we knew exactly tomorrow what are the changes that needs to be made tomorrow for the next flight. We don't wait until the quarter. You make almost instantaneous changes in the way in which you do it. Yeah. And that's when we did dynamic pricing. One of the most innovative things that we did then was, we concluded that if you go back and Google Idris Jala, zero fare, you'll find that I introduced for the first time in the history of Malaysia Airlines, offering zero fare, 1 million seats available. And we told Malaysian passengers, anyone, come on Malaysia Airlines, there are 1 million seats at zero fare. You don't pay a single cent for it. You pay only fuel surcharge. You pay only admin fee for it, but you don't pay any fee. And of course, when we were doing that, I knew exactly which flights we were applying them on, because they were empty anyway. And so if I then sold them at zero fare, at least I'm covered my admin fee, at least I covered for my fuel surcharge. And it was so important, and we got so many passengers coming from AirAsia, because AirAsia could not put zero fare.
You're very good friends with
Tony is
Tony
friend of
Fernandez
mine.
now.
Yeah,
maybe at the time,
it was,
when you had done this, he might not have thought so.
Because I was he wanted to have a public debate with me.
Yes, I remember.
He called me, Idris, you are doing predatory pricing. We should have a public debate on this. Look, this is fair competition. For me, I'm not here to have a public debate on how to run an airline. As far as I'm concerned, I was doing dynamic pricing because my flights were empty. But I told my team, we were very clear where the zero fare was to be applied. If you ever apply the zero fare on the peak flights, for example, on the peak pre-Christmas on school holidays, I'll shoot you. Because we agreed these were only for the low and the lean flights with 4 categories of flights, every single one. We tag them. Peak flight, super peak flight. On the eve of Christmas, for example, on a school holiday. Then we have the peak flights, not super peak, but the peak. Then we have the shoulder and the lean. Thou shalt never put a zero fare on the shoulder, nor the peak, nor the super peak. You will only apply them on the lean flights. And that's why when we did this, it was incredible. Even we were I'm not making money from the lean flights. I was cutting our losses. Because if you cut the flights that's going there, there's no more return flight. Because the return flight was the one that's profitable. But if you cut the going flight, there's no return flights, you've got no revenue. But the only thing we do is I'll cut our losses on the going flights, and the return flight was making money. So I think that's why we made record profits. But they don't do that today. None of them do the zero fare. But I was very clear, but if you have zero discipline in managing the seat inventory, this business of zero fare, you will kill the airline. And so as far as I was concerned, because we are so specific about the seat inventory, we knew exactly where the flights were, the number of seats, exactly which time of day, and we were very sophisticated in doing dynamic pricing. And that's why I think if you do it this way, you can make a lot of money. Yep. But if you don't know what you're doing, you go and shoot yourself too.
So I wanted to unpack the change management aspect of this, because for anyone who is watching or viewing right now, obviously usually the best ideas are the ones, when I used to work in advertising. So whenever we see these award-winning campaigns, the first thing that comes to mind is usually, why didn't I think of that? So it's usually the ideas that produce that, why didn't I think of that effect?
Yeah.
But you look back and think, the difference is that this person actually, or this organization actually executed it executed it well. So I think in this case, I think it's worth talking about the fact that, as we said earlier, you you proposed something that was going to be a big change to how things are done, a very inconvenient change as well operationally.
Yeah.
But to manage the resistance, you did your labs. I
Yes.
think that was good because then it caused people within the organization beyond just your senior leadership to also have buy-in
Yeah.
on what they were going to do, to have a part to play in it. This not only ensures that they have buy-in, but also ensures that now you create not only an environment for for the segmented P&L to be rolled out,
Yep.
but then to back to our point on learning by doing, and now this innovation by doing, you not only create the environment for them to implement and roll out that modality of working, but in doing that, if it wasn't for the fact that you guys had begun to action that,
Right.
then you would not have then created an environment for innovation, i.e., the idea to build and roll out Firefly. Let's go and talk through some questions that have been that we've been getting over the last week. Part of our podcast format is that we take in questions at the end of the podcast, and so we kind of covered some of them earlier. We use that as the basis for our conversation today. But looking at our comments, we have one that says, "What are your thoughts about burnout and how we can navigate that and prevent that within our teams?"
Burnout is a very important challenge for high-performing teams. So if you're a high-performing team, that means you literally are pushing a lot of stuff on the limits. And so you have to find a way how to engage those people and bring them out from being burnout. There is no substitute for finding other people to step into the shoes, because as leader in any organization, you tend to want to give the job for the person that knows best how to do it. And eventually that person is going to get burnt out because no choice, no rest is given. So you have to get someone else to work with that person to learn how to do it so that that person can step out and let that other person take on to the role. So you pay people up. So I always in PEMANDU, we make sure that we pay people up. Some of the best people are grooming other people, learning by doing, so that you then groom others. In consultancy business, and whether you work for McKinsey and if you work for BCG and or PEMANDU, the quit rate is about 30%. You can Google that and you will see that. So if you don't understand how to deal with burnout, you will have even higher quit rate because people cannot take the really hard nose thing. So that's one. That means you get people to learn quickly, step out and do it so that you don't over-rely on a few star players. That's one. The second one is you have to find a way how to get people to chill, relax, bring them to party and enjoy other things. That's why once a year I take my team out so that we go out there one weekend and chill out. Don't talk too much work. And maybe 1 hour, 2 hours of talk about work, and the rest of the time is just socialize and really have fun. The best is if you bring the family along with you. In the earlier part in PEMANDU, we used to do that. We bring the family so that the wives and the spouses, they come around, they understand why there's so much pressure and they're not alone. The others are going through the same thing. So I think the idea of doing that. And the third element is this. This is very individual. The most individual thing, when you watch in your team, Leon, you look at your team here, you look for signs of burnout. The signs of burnout are cryptic comments. People are making very, very cryptic kind of comments that are sometimes overly critical about everything. When you see that changes in a person, that's the early sign. Another sign that you'll find from an individual of an impending burnout is laughter galore. That means the person laughs at the expense of other people. So if you see someone laughing in a galore form at the expense of another, and that is an unusual thing that you find from that person that didn't exist before, then you know that person is reaching a boiling point. I call it laughter galore at the expense of others.
Yeah, the psychological explanation for that is that for people who do that, it is because they, in the season of experiencing, whether it's burnout or maybe
Yeah.
depression, we
Yeah.
don't know, no matter where the source is coming from,
Yeah.
essentially that individual is, because they're unable to process what's going
Yeah.
on within them,
Yeah.
they then project that
On
onto
others.
another person.
And the third signs of potential burnout at the individual level is depression or being withdrawn, or the person just become quiet, doesn't talk anymore in the open forum. They become withdrawn, and that's early sign of depression. And so, if you see this in leadership, be able to watch it at the individual level. The first two I described before was more on an organizational level, when you bring people out and have an enjoyment, have a party, and cool them down, etc. But this is at the individual level. You better have a look at that. You really have to have a look. When you start looking at that, but you must tackle it at the individual basis. The supervisor need to reach out to that person and start to talk to them. So mental well-being is a real thing.
There's also, I mean, so we talked about on an individual basis from the standpoint of the organization or from the standpoint of the leader, but actually maybe we can also talk about what are maybe, number one, maybe signs that you yourself might be burnt out. So, from the individual who's actually experiencing it, but then also what are things that you can do about it. So for me personally, I wouldn't say that I have, because I also don't want to use the term lightly. I feel sometimes this is a term that is thrown around a little too lightly. Burnout is not simply being stressed.
No.
Because there can be a tendency, I think, for people to mistake the two things and think I'm stressed about something and therefore I am burnt out. Actually, burnout is something that's a lot more severe and a lot more serious, because the actual outcome of burnout sometimes is things like burnout to the point of actually causing depression. So I wouldn't say, I perhaps come close to burnout. And I think my experience, I actually sought therapy during this period because I didn't quite know how to deal with it, nor was it serious enough for me to know that it was really an issue. It was right on the cusp of burnout. And I remember when I spoke to a therapist about it, what was actually quite eye-opening was, to your point on the clearer the diagnosis, the clearer the cause or the prescription is. So in my case, what I thought were the issues were not the issues at all, because I was attributing I wouldn't call it burnout. I want to respect the term. So I would call it a high level of stress to the point of maybe a borderline depression. I was thinking that a lot of it was circumstantial. I'm stressed out because I feel I need to perform because we have X amount of projects, and it was during the pandemic as well. So there were a lot of things for me to kind of conveniently place the blame on. We were going through a pandemic, new ways of working, adjusting to working from home. I had also just become a father at that time. But then what was quite insightful for me was realizing that actually the real source of it is not those external circumstances at all. The source of it was that I had this thing that they call automatic negative thoughts. So I thought, okay, right, that makes sense. And as we dove a bit deeper, the negative thought stemmed from, for whatever reason, me having this kind of core belief that I am not good enough. And that actually all of my achievements, if I were to be very honest about how I was spurred on to win awards or do whatever it was, or to do well, actually, if I was to be very honest with myself, a lot of that stemmed from a negative place of feeling that I was not good enough. For whatever reason, I got no reason to truly believe that, but I grew up thinking that I was not good enough, and therefore I lived my life overcompensating for that. The result of which, in my case, turned out to be positive. But actually, the core of it wasn't. And so, because my efforts were not sustained through from a positive place, that made me then more susceptible to getting to this stage of near burnout. So, I think one practical thing that we did, and perhaps if there's anyone who feels that you might be experiencing burnout, or you are maybe on the verge or on a trajectory towards burnout, is ask yourself whether, are you feeling like this because you are overcompensating for an unhealthy belief. And the way to curb that is we did this exercise. It's like it seems so rudimentary and so simple, but actually it's the fact it's the act of doing it regularly that really starts to help. And it was very simple. So if I have a statement, my statement is that Leon is not good enough. So that becomes the top of the house, as it were. Now I will start to look for evidences, both for the statement and evidences against the statement. And the practice here is to write them out on paper. We talked before about the power of writing something on paper. So we do that. We do that with therapists. So all of the statements that suggest that this is all of the evidences, and it has to be actual evidence, not theories, evidence to suggest that the statement is true, evidence to suggest that the statement is false. And when you do that, what you will find out more often than not is that the evidences against the statement are going to far outweigh the evidences for the statement. So actually, starting from that basis, you are then able to get rid of any
Negative.
of the negative or unhelpful things. So that once you've cleared that, if there are objectively then some things that need to be done to change the situation, you can focus on the proactive actions to take rather than wallowing in this kind of unhealthy self-pity. So I found that was important for me, actually understanding myself and understanding my patterns, which then helped me to, because I identified that, it meant that my cure for burnout actually wasn't to do less. My cure to that situation was just to have the right mindset to doing the same amount of output, but now no longer doing it to try to prove a point, but really just doing what I need to do for the benefit of my teams, for the benefit of those that I was reporting to as well, and having a more objective view on things. So I think that is one principle. Another principle is, you talked about retreat. And I think in the past, I've had a tendency to think, well, okay, I will take a break, a very concerted break once a year. But there's actually a lot of value in figuring out, okay, you have your once a year sort of more, a bigger retreat or a bigger break. But how can you start to pencil in dates in the diary for smaller things?
Yourself.
Even if it's just a day trip, what are little small things you can include in your week or even in your day that fill your tank? And I think when we start to develop a practice of doing that, it's much like going to the gym. When that becomes habit, you work a certain muscle. And this becomes a muscle for you to then be more aware of things, understanding yourself, and then knowing how to navigate stress and to avoid burnout. So I think that's good. Thank you for asking this question. This was David. The other question is, Erin asked, has any of your advice ever backfired and created more negative results?
Negative results. I don't see many people that came out and said they were not negative. I wouldn't say they were backfiring, but people only say that the idea of a game of the impossible is not meant for everybody because there's a lot of sacrifices, and I kind of agree with that. But there are people that says, I want to live a very normal life. I don't want to become a star. I don't want to be a top performer. I just want to be a Mr. or Mrs. Ordinary. And that's fine as well. Depends on what your true north in life is.
Exactly.
It
all comes down to what your true north is. If that is your true north, you are fulfilling your true north.
That's your true north. That's what you want, and that's what you anchored. So that's okay. So when I give my advice, I was trying to tell them to game the impossible, but I also have the true north, the principle anchoring on your true north. So that's very important. I want to return back to the point that you said before about burnout. The famous, very good songwriter and lyricist called Jackson Brown.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to refer to someone else.
He used the term running on empty. So when you listen to that song, Running on Empty, it isn't just that person is not wanting to work. You could be doing the work. You can be pushing yourself until you reach a point you run on empty. So I think in a high-performing organization, there are people inside the thing they already are numb to the fact they are running on empty. And this happen to be the very best people in your organization. If you're not careful, they don't complain about it. They don't reject the hard work. They embrace all the hard work. If you give them 3 more tasks on top of what they embrace them. They didn't realize that in time they're going to run on empty. And so I think you have to watch what happened to your stars. So when we deploy people in PEMANDU, we have them by name. Every month, quarter, we know who's going what project. When you start looking at it, then you realize that we are putting certain individual running on empty. And so you have to make some changes in the scheduling for the work so that they don't run on empty. So and I think most people who are struggling with the work, they put up their hands. They say, oh, I'm overworked. They complain. But some of the superstars, they don't complain. They just take it in their strides, but they don't realize the toll it's making on them, and not just them, and their families as well.
Yeah.
And so very, very important to go and do that. So that's my addition to the point that
it's good. And we do say that in the intro of this podcast that we talk about transformation through the lens of business, leadership. We mentioned sport, but I realized except for maybe our first 2 episodes, we have not really touched on that aspect. So actually on that, I feel that is also very relevant to physical fitness as well. Just the other day, our associate vicar was giving a workshop, and he was talking about health, because we do a monthly survey with through this tool called Peak On, and it shows you where your organization is winning and where your organization maybe isn't doing so well. And in our case, the last couple of months, a point for conversation was physical health. People in our teams felt that that health wasn't a priority. So we've been trying to be a bit more intentional about that. And in his session, he pointed out something which I thought was interesting. Whenever we think about fitness or health, we tend to attribute that to performance. But the point here was actually high performance isn't always an indicator of health, because you can actually be high performance, but actually low in health. So that has got me thinking about how can I be creating the right conditions to not only be high performing in the sports or the activities that I do, but to ensure that I have the health to be able to sustain that. I've been wearing this sleep tracker recently, which shows me a recovery score. And I've started to realize that while I might be high performing in the gym or in the sports or in my running, if I look at it in the context of recovery, actually my recovery is very poor. So I've discovered that I don't get enough sleep. I'm actually not fully recovered and actually therefore not fully optimized for my workouts. So I just thought that was an interesting point.
Actually now by looking at the watch, I'm due to go and play tennis with Mom.
We've extended, we've overrun, but I think this has been a good session, and let's save some content for the bank for subsequent episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys next week. Have a good tennis session.
Thank you.